Hello, listening people.
Hello.
Ooh, Bartek, hello. Ooh, you scared me. Spooky.
Sorry, Ryan, you beaut.
Thank ya. God blimey, Bartek.
Hmm.
You really got me in the spinal column with how much you just jumped up from behind and said, hello. Oh, spooky, scary.
No, it wasn't out from behind. We were just talking all about, Australian and British lingo stuff, right?
Should we talk about New Zealand lingo?
And then you said something about how, I referenced things that we talked about before the recording and then act like we talked about it during the recording. Remember? This is in the episode.
No, I don't remember, but I do remember that we're called Spit and Polish, and we are here to present our show, Pictures Powwow, the original PP.
Came up with it myself.
Did you know that we are releasing this episode during a very important time of year?
Oh,
very important.
It's not one of the 12 months, is it?
It is one of the 12 months, a very important month for us and the world.
The one that begins with S and not the one with your birthday in it.
No. Ooh, spooky. This isn't being released in a month with beginning with S.
No, but it's being recorded in one.
But that's not what I said. I said released. Listen with your ears, not your heart.
Oh, no. It's almost like in the last episode, I'm the one that brought us to the attention of Spooky Month.
Oh, no, I'm scared. You scared me again. You brought it up. You said it. We're in Spooky Month.
Sorry.
It's Spooky Month, and October is important because we also started our podcast during October. So it's a double whammy for the pod.
That's right. Yes, spook.
That's right. Yeah, see, we've all come full circle now. Now I'm a cop to Bartek. I'm just here being a
not
spook.
to me.
Well, maybe. I have to police your comments sometimes. I have to stop Bartek and go, are you sure you want to say that one? And you go, core blimey,
I'm the one that warns about the spook one.
That's right. But we are doing our show Pictures Powwow, in which we talk about a movie that has come recommended. And this month we are talking about movies that are a bit more spooky, a bit more eerie, a bit more strange, a bit more creepy. Whether they be directly related to horror, whether they be gothic, or they just feel right to watch at this time of the year. There's a certain aura, mood, vibe to October when it comes to watching things or listening to things, and Bartek was burdened with kicking off the month. So what did you, and not only that, you had to pick a foreign film too.
Yes, I did.
So what did you select this time?
I selected a film that's been on my list for just a little while. It is the 2003 Japanese film Gozu.
Gozu?
Gozu.
Directed by?
Directed by a person that we've done one film of before, Takashi Miike.
People, if you are not aware of Takashi Miike, he is a prolific film director. He has done way, way too many for one human being. He's a guy that will put out like 10 a year. He's got a lot under his belt. He has done kids' movies, comedies, horror,
dramas,
period piece.
Adaptations of video games, adaptations of books, adaptations of letters, I think.
Action films. And here we are talking about one relatively early in his career, but not, you could say the height of his career, because he just did Ichi the Killer a bit before this, written by the same writer as this film. Audition hovers around this period as well, which features some of the same actors. Those are like the 2 or 3 big ones of Takashi Miike. There's others, of course, along the way. There's, what was that one you mentioned? Guest Zero or something.
A Visitor Q, I think.
Visitor Q. There's that one that's a big one. But Takashi Miike is...
Crow's Zero.
He's a very interesting fellow, and we are talking about a very, very bizarre and interesting film that is hard to summarize. So I say to all of you, give it a watch. You can find it relatively easily online. I watched it on the Internet Movie Archive, and it was right there. It was there for me to watch with subtitles. It works. It's not for the faint of heart, this movie, or ones who love conventional storytelling, but it's interesting. It
Hmm.
sure is interesting. But Bartek, how would you pitch this to someone who hasn't seen it, but you want them to watch it?
So putting aside all of its stylistic decisions, the basic story of this film is that a young Yakuza member has been tasked by his boss to take his older brother mentor, Yakuza friend, over to a suburb in the city of Nagoya, where because this older brother friend has gone kind of crazy lately, he's going to be silenced and, disposed of. But along the way, the friend suddenly dies, and then when the main character goes to get a coffee, he turns around and realizes the body is gone, and so he explores this entire neighborhood trying to find traces of like where did the body go. That's the general story, but very, very interesting things happen every step of the way.
It's an odyssey.
Yeah, it's
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 an odyssey, to say the least. Lots of surreal things happen.
yeah. In a way, it's like a couple of films that we've done before, where main characters wander around and just encounter interesting character after interesting character, and there's all sorts of different tones. Like I'm thinking Bubble Boy, Around the World in 80 Days. We haven't done it on the pod, but Apocalypse Now comes to mind as well. It's one of these kinds of films, but it's very, you can tell it's something psychological is going on.
Something very abstract, something very primal.
Hmm.
That is this film. Now, please, everyone, go watch this for yourself. It is something that is worthy of your attention. It's an experience movie. You may not like the experience, but it definitely is unique
Hmm.
because during the spooky month, we'll see what our selections will be and what types of vibes they are. But I feel that this isn't a horror film per se,
Yeah.
but it is unsettling. It's funny. It's so weird, but it's unnerving is the thing that is prevailing throughout it all. The way I would describe it, because I've never seen this film before, never heard of this film before. I'm aware of Takashi Miike, and when you presented it for the spooky month, I was thinking it was going to be like some of the other horror films I've seen of his, which are more overtly horrific and disgusting
Yeah.
and cruel. Like Audition is such a cruel movie. It's a cool movie too, but it's really cruel to its characters. But this is different to that. So if people are aware of Takashi Miike's other like work, you have to throw that out of your mind for a second.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just gonna say to finish it off, the way I would describe this is a panic attack. This is an anxiety for over 2 hours. That's how I describe this movie. This is just like living, breathing, waking anxiety and panic for 2 hours.
Yeah, this was one where I actually didn't know too much about it going in, other than that it's apparently, one of his best films. But I read the, basic synopsis on like Wikipedia and it said like, oh, this is a Takashi Miike horror film, and I think that might be like the only genre that was attached to it. Maybe there was like black comedy or something, but I was interested in seeing like, oh, why is this a horror film? Because this is a non-English language film, so I had to make sure that the subtitles worked. So I had to skim it a little bit and find dialogue, and it didn't look very much like a horror film. Like I think the whole movie, other than like one or two moments, is like set during the day.
Mm-hmm.
And it just mostly seems to be characters talking to each other. So I was like, okay, where does the horror come in? So I was interested to check the film out, to see that. And I do agree with you. Like, I wouldn't outright say it was a scary film, but the unnerving aspect of it was very much like a David Lynch film. It was reminding me a lot of like the, I guess, tone of Twin Peaks: The Return,
Mm-hmm.
but the events were reminding me more of like the weirder moments of the first two seasons, like when you encounter a weird character and you don't know what their deal is right
I was
away.
gonna say Mulholland Drive
Mulholland Drive as well,
as
yeah.
well, in which you have like people disappear and then there's doppels of them, but they're not the same person. That's more Lost Highway, if anything. But it sounds it sounds like trite to always reference David Lynch, but I
Yeah.
would say the horror or the irksome qualities of this really are similar in a lot of ways to what David Lynch did, but also what he does later on. The Return, Twin Peaks: The Return, is definitely what I thought of, and I thought of one specific scene in Twin Peaks: The Return. That's probably one of my most like, oh my god, David, stop fucking me up. And I'm sure you think of this as well as a standout David Lynch scene that you've seen, which is in Twin Peaks: The Return. Bobby
Mm.
is now a sheriff or like head of the police, or he's one of the policemen. Sorry, he's one of the police.
Yeah, he
He's
works
one
at the
of
sheriff.
he's one of those deputies. He's
Yeah,
a
that's
deputy,
exactly a deputy.
and he's at the cafe,
Yeah.
and a gunshot goes off outside. So he goes out there to investigate, and there's like this family dispute of a kid actually. So the gun off in the car, and he's like, "Oh, okay," gets that sorted. But then there's a woman behind
Mm-hmm.
that's beeping her car, and he walks over and has a discussion with this woman who's got a child or something next to them that's just sick and oozing, and there's just screaming and panic, and you're like, is this real? What's happening? That's this movie for 2 hours.
Yeah,
That's this movie for 2 hours. That scene is this movie
I
the
thought of
whole
that-
way through. I
I
was like,
thought
oh my god. Every minute of this movie, I was like, oh my god. Oh, even when it was calm and quiet, I was still like, oh Jesus Christ, this is just
I was thinking,
ratcheting up the tensions.
I was thinking of that moment specifically before he even gets to the town, like when he's like, that car's a Yakuza car. And like, it's just an old woman grinning and having a bloody nose, and she doesn't say or do anything except, drive away when told to. And even then, she awkwardly reverses her way out of the horizon.
The film is so unlike any other. This year I feel like we've said it's been the year of musicals, but it's also been inadvertently the year of abstract surreal films. We did On the Silver Globe,
Mm-hmm.
and I was thinking while watching this, man, On the Silver Globe was like easy and breezy compared to but at the end of this movie, and when it like abruptly ends, I'm thinking to myself, wow, I think I understood On the Silver Globe more. I was worried, how do I come into this podcast discussion? What do I say about this?
I kind of did too,
it's
yeah.
so weird, which is true, but what's the substance? What's the meaning to this all? And you brought this to us, so could you please remind us all, why this movie? How did this come into your orbit, and what made you get drawn to this one for this year?
Sure. Well, I talked about it last year with 13 Assassins as well, but last year I played through No More Heroes 3, a game by video game developer Suda51, who is evidently a very, very big Takashi Miike fan because he's appeared in like 2 games in the franchise, and there's references to his films all throughout, which I realize now one of them is kind of a reference to this film's title, which I'll explain later. But there's a, recurring discussions about him throughout the franchise, but in the 3rd game, there's every chapter of the story, 2 characters sit down and basically shoot the shit about Takashi Miike films. And there's one section where they talk about like, oh, what's the best film? What's the most fucked up? What's the X one? And they both simultaneously, unanimously agreed that Gozu was the best one. So that just kind of put it on the list of like, okay, got to see that one then. Like 13 Assassins was one that were like, that's one of the 3 great period films that he's made.
Interesting. So you, having played a video game that references this, made you want to watch this. You had seen Takashi Miike works before doing the video games like that reference him?
Yeah, this is the 4th film I've seen of his. The first one I'd seen was the Ace Attorney film. That came out like first year uni for us. Then I watched a 2015 one called, I think it's The Lion Howls in the Wind or something like that. It's like a doctor drama. Then last year we saw 13 Assassins and now Gozu.
Gozu, I didn't know the plot. I didn't know what was happening for the first 15 minutes, because the realization that the driver was our main character was a revelation, because we start out with the member who's going to be the target.
Yeah, Ozaki.
And the performance from him and the way it's played in the first scene or 2 really does make you attentive and drawn in and thinking, how is this going to sustain itself? What is happening? Because the film opens up on a television screen, and it pulls out, and it's in like a little, restaurant, back alley, whatever establishment, and there's just a bunch of, men in suits and shirts and all that,
Yeah.
like clearly
It's a Yakuza
crime,
family.
clearly a Yakuza family. And there's this guy, and he's so serious. Like he I don't know what it is, but there's certain films and even certain countries that just understand the visual language of just getting a person with a certain look, a certain face, certain vibe that just communicates everything you need to know before dialogue even happens.
Mm.
And that's definitely what happened with this film. I was like, okay, I this guy is intense, he's serious. We find out he's insane probably. And it's played so straight, the beginning, but it's so absurd and comedic as he's describing, like, this is a Yakuza kill dog, like they kill Yakuza people, and it's like the tiniest dog you've ever seen
and he
in your
introduces
life.
this with like, this is just a joke, don't take it seriously.
Yes, but he says it so seriously.
Mm.
And then he obviously proceeds to go outside, grab this tiny dog, and beat it to death and throw it around, and it's so silly. It's so silly, but his performance and the way it's shot is not in on the, like, it's not winking at you with the joke, especially with one of my favorite shots of the film was the blood dripping down the window and it divides his face, and it's like, that's such a dramatic shot, but this scene is absolutely funny. It's just so funny as he's like, his mentality and his psyche is breaking apart. Like, here's how this works, and it's like the most silly thing, but they're all reacting to it like, is this real? Yeah, that's got to be real. Like,
Yeah.
I know we said it's a joke, but man, they all just sit down like, wow, this is a lot to take in. And then when the turn happens later, like, oh, they're just humoring him because he's clearly insane. It was very interesting to reflect back on this intro scene. I was like, oh, that's what I kept thinking of with this movie. It was constantly making you reflect back on those previous scenes and how you interpreted them may have been wrong.
Yeah, it starts off kind of like just a Yakuza film where, oh, this guy's crazy, and then, as it goes on, it turns into what it becomes. Yeah, it was an interesting first scene, and there's one of the Yakuza goons there. People these days would recognize him because he played a very iconic character in Yakuza 0.
Mm-hmm.
Like, within the first minute, I had to pause it to like turn up the volume or something, but I called out to my brother. It's like, hey, Oscar Kuze's in this, and he laughed at that. It's just an iconic recurring boss in that game. So it was really cool to see him. But yeah, that first scene really kind of sets the... Does it set the tone?
It sets a tone.
It sets a tone for sure.
I think it sets the tone because the film throughout it all is never winking at you that it's being funny. I feel like
there is one fourth wall break, but
the cards on the wall.
Yeah,
but even that's played as eerie.
It is played as eerie. Yeah,
that's played as eerie. Like, yes, there's an overt comedic streak to this film, and it is very funny.
I was watching, I'm like, oh, Ryan's gonna find this hilarious. There are so many, as you call them, freaks in this.
Yeah, there's so many freaks. And yes, that's all. That's all there. But again, to reference David Lynch has a very funny sensibility, but it's not like his films are like looking at you and being like, I'm a comedy. This is funny. And that's how I felt about this. So the opening, I do think, sets a tone because you have this killing of the dog, but it's again, it's that dynamic of having this most over the top
absurdity played straight.
Yeah, absurdity played straight, and that's this entire movie. To when you get to the big moments, like a person getting birthed, a full-grown person getting birthed out of a woman, or a cow head on all that. Even, it still plays straight.
Even just like really minor things, like there's the guy who, like, half his face is white and it's like skin pigmentation, but then the end of his very first scene shows you that it's flaking off.
Yes, of course. And he is so, again, bizarre of a character, that guy, because he comes across as like muscle, intimidating, you don't want to fuck with me, but as the movie reveals, he's just a neurotic little baby
Yeah, he
mess,
switches
and
between
he's constantly
scenes.
getting injured
Yeah,
off screen.
and
Might I add, like off screen, he's been injured somehow, and it's like it's all your fault, by the
it's
way.
Minami's fault, the main character.
It's your fault, by the way. Is he's wearing a neck brace now, and you're like, how did that happen? It's your fault.
You told me to get out of your room, so I waited out here. Now I'm injured.
That's you, and that, by the way, that's your fault.
Yeah.
Always reminding him somehow it's your fault that I got injured. How did you get injured? It's your fault.
And then it reveals that like two of the freaks from an earlier scene are like the school bullies from his junior high years.
Amazing, amazing stuff. So, outside of just recounting moments and scenes and images that are obviously striking, what about this film worked or didn't? Did you enjoy this overall? Were you a fan, or was it not for you?
I love this film. I had a really, really good time. And that was even before I looked up, like, the analysis of, like, what it all meant. It like, you kind of nailed it earlier when you said that this film is a journey. It's like a 2-hour something minute, just stream of consciousness kind of thing where it's like, who are you going to meet next? I think the films that I listed earlier, like, Bubble Boy, Apocalypse Now, Around the World in 80 Days, like that, they all have that like fun, not like road trippy, aspect to it, but just like
Again, an Odyssey quality.
Odyssey.
We go on a journey for a specific purpose, but along the way we meet these characters, these figures that are friends or foes, that are easy to understand or represent something, or completely foreign and abstract and alien.
Yeah, so just seeing what comes next, trying to piece together, what some sort of meaning. Like, it obviously gets to a point where it's like, okay, this can't be literal, right?
You would hope so.
Mm.
When did you get to that point? When did you get to the point when it couldn't be literal for you? Because I felt like I got there really early with that.
There was something early
when it was like,
yeah.
That's a Yakuza car. That's a car that's designed to kill Yakuzas. I'm like, well, okay, come on.
Well, at that point, it's like, oh, my friend is crazy. He's being crazy now. But
I understand that, but from my point of view, I took it pretty much early because the way the camera shoots it, it's so like zoomed.
You know what?
Like, look at this. The car's it's supposed to be like the car's insane, but it's just the shittiest looking.
You know what?
Car.
In retrospect, the person driving that car should have given it away.
There's a callback to her.
There is. There's like someone's bleeding out their nose later on, right?
The mob boss, when he sits on his ladle up his bottom, and he bleeds the same and has the same smile, and he's like, "What does that mean, though?" Because what does that mean? I don't know. But again, before we get to the recounting or going through some of those great moments, you love this. You had a great time with this even before you read up on what the film was going for, what people interpret its meanings are.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, really. I'm still processing it. I haven't looked up anything.
Yeah.
I just watched it. I took it in. I'm still taking it in.
I feel like I am too.
And I don't know, because I enjoyed it. I thought it was very funny. I laughed a lot. Some sequences in this are genuinely jaw-dropping in terms of like the cinematography, the practical effects of it, the lighting. It's great, but I did feel a drag at points. I'm like, okay, I gotta, there are points, and you've had this with movies I like that are artsy, and I've had this with movies you like that are artsy, where you just have what I call like the pretentious threshold, where I'm like, oh, I'm enjoying it, and then it breaks through the pretentious threshold where I'm like, oh yes, very good. Like, I'm like a bit artsy-fartsy, pretentious wank.
Yeah.
And there were moments of that for me.
It can be very hit or miss.
I was like, not too much, but it's stretched. And when it got to that, I don't want to say hate the end, but when the end happened, I did throw up my hands and went, oh, sure. Like, I was just sure, I guess.
It's like a happy ending for this film.
Great. It just so abruptly ends. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, it's not like I thought I was going to get answers per se, but it was just still one of those moments where I'm just like, oh, all right, here we go. Thank you. The movie just went over now. Okay. So overall, positive experience, but it's definitely one I am still chewing on how I fully feel about it. And I don't know if I'm wanting to go out and rewatch this again anytime soon, but
Mm.
it's still not like other movies. Which, how often can you say that, especially from one that's like 20 something years old now?
21, yeah.
Yeah. So, what do you want to discuss? What do you want to jump into?
For as bizarre as this film is, one thing that it kind of does have going for it is that the main character is really grounded. He's portrayed as, very normal, and a lot of the absurd things that are happening in this film are, whether literally or not, diegetically happening to him. It's not necessarily like screwing with us, the audience. It's happening to him, and we're, watching it happen around him. And the fact that he is portrayed as, such a normal guy who, he cares about his Aniki, his older brother character, and he's trying to make sense of all this. It really adds to that whole surreal aspect.
It does. I have issues with him as a character. I guess by design you need him to be this way, but he's a very passive character. A lot of this is just watching him with a mouth agape, being like, "What?"
Hmm.
And I liked when in the back half started to become more of a detective character and things were unraveling and he went to this place and they had information. He went to that place, they had further information, and it led him to here, and then he met the female version and that really threw him for a loop. And like that section of the movie I liked, where he's trying to figure out if this is true or not, and how much does she know and how much does she not know, and is she playing him to get at the other crime guys, and things of that nature. A film that this reminded me of, just talking about his characterization too, was The Warriors, in which we have our main character in The Warriors where he's just like, I'm just a guy who wants to run away. And I have to, keep encountering these strange figures, and, I have a very simple goal. And, that one was also surrounded by much more interesting things, but he was kind of like a participant. And this film reminded me of The Warriors at times as well, especially the junk gang, like in this one where there's the junkyard gang where it's hey, we just live in
the
filth.
crew or something. Yeah,
we just live in filth.
Something Shirayama crew, I think it was.
And we crush people in cars, and look, we keep the remains in a bucket. Do you want to identify from the bucket? And you're like, okay.
Oh, you mean the cleaners?
Were they the cleaners? Like,
because there's the ones that like he gets the riddle from, and then there's the cleaners at the end who he has to take the guy to.
No, I'm talking about the riddle ones, because they're like, we think we may have killed got rid of your brother's body. Here, it's in this container. Is that it? And then they're like, no, that's not it. And then it's like, do you want to see this illustration that we have? And it's like,
oh right, yeah, they had the illustration. Yeah,
they're hanging up like like a cutout of this guy, and it's like, is this him? And points at the penis of the thing. It's like, is that him? It's like, no, I don't think that's it.
That's the cleaners at the end.
I thought that was much earlier in the movie. Because
those are two different. Those are two different people. Because that was the crew that the boss was like, oh yeah, I have these associates there. Ask them for help. They might help you find him.
All right.
And then later on, he goes to the removers, and they have like the squashed bodies of all these people that they've killed.
Well, all of that still is to the point of, it reminds me of stuff like The Warriors, where you have these different factions that are just so hyper specific in their visualization. Like if what were their names in The Warriors? The loser gang, like the one that's just like the babies or whatever they were. And
they wore the green shirts.
Yeah, and they're just like losers. They just suck, and they're like the babies. Or I can't remember what they were called. They were just lame, and
they were great.
Shit. And that's what I felt with this movie. It's filled with like these crime gangs that are all lame.
They were the ones that were like, oh yeah,
and they're like, oh, we live in trash. Like we just live in a junkyard, by the way. And that was definitely something. But our main character, yeah, they're good. I thought the performance was decent. The actor does a decent job of having to just look at these things being inflicted upon him and have to take them in stride. He again very much is passive. He's experiencing the journey, but he's not reacting to it. Like he's not proactive, I should say.
It's the type of film where you need this kind of main character, because if he was Ozaki throughout this film, it's like, okay, we have this crazy person bouncing off of all this interesting stuff, and we'd want it to, we'd want him to tone it down to let the film breathe and show us these weird factions, because yeah, there's just so many of them. There's the people running the diner who are like all cross dressers. There's the brother and sister that run the inn, who we come back to them multiple times throughout the film, and every single time, craziness happens.
Craziness does happen. And as your October pick,
as my first one,
oh yeah, I'm talking about currently though. Like you decided this is your pick for the start of spooky month. How did this film serve for that means of getting you in the mood to watch these eerie, bizarre, creepy, spooky, scary types of films? Did it quench that thirst? Did it get you excited for more? How did it work in that vein?
before I answer that, first of all, The Orphans.
The Orphan.
Second of all, I'm actually quite happy that I started off with like such a bizarre film, because I think a lot of the time we do have at least one or two where it's pretty straightforward horror. And I imagine we'll have some of those later on in the month. But yeah, having an interesting, uh, different cultural type of horror early on, I think that really helped. Like, I always think back to Perfect Blue as being, one of my favorite films that we've done on Spooky Month. I know that was my pick as well, and I'd seen it before, but yeah, so something slow and, kind of contemplative, where it's like, okay, we got psychological element happening.
Yes, I appreciate it on getting to the emotional level. You talk about the psychological, I think of it on the emotional, in which when you looked into it, you can talk to us about like some of these meanings and interpretations of it. But I reacted purely on a guttural primal level. For me, this very much feels like an ongoing state of panic,
Hmm.
of anxiety, because the heart of the film is about betrayal, because our main character is tasked with killing someone that's very important to him and betraying him. And is he capable and or willing to do that? And the body disappears, and he's on the hunt for this person that in the end he has to betray. And each scene, each moment is just this cacophony of worry, of just overwhelming sense of like retreat, where he wants to run away, but also he has the task to do at the same time. So when he has to go in to ask questions to these other characters, especially when we revisit them, their mentalities change, but they're very staunch and firm. They're never just like regular, like, oh, I haven't seen him before. There's always just a level of hostility to it, or distance that doesn't feel real or natural. And it's very much how one feels when they're in a state of panic or guilt or anxiety, where it's like the world is working against you. And that's very much how I kept reacting to it. There's all these things that are just hard to track, but that was the connective thread for me, was just there were the emotional stuff. Like, one moment that really hit me was when he was inside of the restaurant at the beginning, where he had, he served up all the stuff and the body goes missing. He goes outside during one of these moments, because he goes in and out several times.
Yeah.
But there's this one bit where he goes outside and it just is a hard cut. It's such a hard cut of him exiting, and we're outside now, and it's this sickly yellow. Like, everything's yellow. Like, the color grading and temperature is fucking off from what it was just a moment ago. But then when he goes back in, it's remaining that sickly yellow. And I don't know I don't know what that means, or if there was a technical fuck up there, but boy, did it get me in the headspace of this character. It's almost like he's entered a fever dream.
Yeah, this film is as yellow as Thunderpants is green.
I thought you were going to say as yellow as Lemonade Joe. But
It's not.
I know, but I'm being hyperbolic.
All you were saying.
But if you're going to say that, Thunderpants is not green in the temperature.
Yeah.
It's green in terms of set design. This was not yellow in terms of set design or costumes. It was like we've made the color of the film post-production yellow for some reason, and I loved it, but it made me, again, I don't, that's the thing with many of these movies, people hate them because there's no logical meaning, or I don't get it. I don't get this, but a part of me gets it at the same time. Like a part of me is like, oh, I have a reaction to it that feels honest.
I've been trying to say this for 2 minutes now, but basically this is a really good example of, what the people mean by the Japanese tell stories differently. It's very emotional, and it's very much about what the characters are feeling from what they're getting at from the scenes. And one of the elements that I read up about, actually no, I saw an interview that Takashi Miike had, where he talked about how part of the inspiration for this came from an experience or a general sort of thing that happened in his childhood, where sometimes you would, go out on your bike and you'd go to the next town over, and it will be a town that you've never been to before, and just like around every corner is something different, something new, something mysterious, and you might encounter people there who are like, oh, that's a strange old man, or that's an interesting lady looking at me. And so part of the experience that the main character has in this is the fact that he is in this unfamiliar place. Like, the plot requires him to, take his aniki all the way over to this remote suburb of a different city, because I think he's from Tokyo, he's going to Nagoya. And he's just wandering around the whole town, going to all these new places. He's being directed by some of the characters to, go to this liquor store, go to this inn, go to the junkyard. And it's all this unfamiliar stimuli being thrown at him. And that feeling is captured very strongly. And yeah, like you said, the eerie yellow kind of adds to that whole, like, this is not right. I'm almost tricking myself into thinking that this is like a town next to the desert or something.
It feels post-apocalyptic.
Yeah. Feels like this is like a town that, like Mad Max 1. I feel like this is a town that you'd walk by there.
Again, it feels empty. It feels vacant. Yet this is supposed to be a city. But we're on the outskirts. We're in these little parts of it that most people wouldn't regularly be at, like the junkyard or these back alleys, or here's this brother and sister inn where they don't have any customers, and if they do, you don't even notice they exist. If they did exist, then they're always serving you lots of things there. It's complimentary.
Yeah, okay. That's a recurring line in the film.
It's complimentary. And that sense of dysphoria about being in a different place is very much captured. I love that in films. I love when that's captured both as a positive and negative thing. When you were discussing that interview and that recollection, it made me weirdly enough think of David Byrne talking about True Stories, in which the film True Stories is like David Byrne is like this documentarian weird character in that, where he's like looking at a fictional town in Texas, and he's describing like all these weird things to you, but that's done in like a positive manner where it's like, isn't this strange?
Isn't his character called like the Traveler or something?
Yeah. He's just like the narrator or something. But he, and David Byrne talks about like that sensation, but in a very different way to how Takashi Miike is obviously talking about it or representing it.
Doesn't he have a line about like, I love getting lost or something?
Yes. And you're at home here in a weird way. But I've had that too, both sides, multiple sides of it, where you're in a foreign place to you, and it's both exciting and terrifying, and you feel welcomed, you feel judged, you feel included, you feel excluded, you all of this, and this film very much captures the nightmarish version of that. And again, it all comes back to he's doing this all in the aid of finding someone he has to ultimately betray.
Hmm.
And so, like, what's the point of looking for this guy? Like, on his level, like, on his personal level. Like, yeah, he
Yeah.
doesn't want to get killed by his bosses, but on the personal level, why does he want to succeed at this? Because in the end, the success of this is to betray himself as well as his brother figure.
Hmm. And that leads somewhat into, the meaning behind everything.
Did you have a moment in Gozu that you were just shaking your head at, going, okay, now this is a true WTF for me?
I feel like there were multiple like that, but I think when we see the cowhead guy in the inn, that was a pretty big one.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, Gozu does mean cowhead.
Oh, interesting. So that ties in. I I don't know why, but as soon as the female version of the person he's hunting down got introduced, that's where the movie, I don't know why, we had all of this fucked up shit beforehand, but the way this actress plays it too is just so good. I would have watched the whole movie of her being this, but there's that moment where she is with the crime boss,
Yeah, the boss.
and I'm just, I don't know why it's not so crazy or what the fuck, but it definitely did fuck with me. I couldn't tell if she's going to trick him, or if she's just like you can just have me, like
Hmm.
that whole sequence of events.
Because
I find the most trippy because the
Yeah.
way it's performed and executed is so contradictory, but in the most beautiful of ways.
And there's also that moment a little bit earlier where like she almost got picked up by the trucker guy, and it's like,
Yes.
okay, she's kind of promiscuous with other men, kind of thing.
Or anyone, because she said, if you want to have sex with me, just make sure I'm awake for it. It's like, oh, alrighty then.
And then when she introduces herself to the boss, like when she's with the goons, it's like, oh, I'm this person's daughter or something, and he eventually remembers that person.
The movie relies on people not remembering other people and then being like, oh, I'm sure you are who you say you are, so let's do this then. And yeah, just that whole sequence with her on the couch and he's grabbing the ladle and he's explaining, and she's like spreading her legs, and she just has this look at her face where I'm like, she's going to betray this guy, right? And she's going to, but then you cut and she's just like laying on the floor like a rag doll, not moving. And again, I'm like, I don't know why, but that was the bit that fucked with me the most. I'm just like, for some reason, like the cow head and the titty milk and like the woman reading the cue cards off the wall. For some reason, that was all kind of like in rhythm for what the movie was doing. That it didn't really make me go, "What the fuck?" in the same way as
They were they were connecting
that
things
whole
there.
bit of her just being like, like planning and like there's something on going on here, to then just like, oh, she's just like been turned off and she's just on the floor. I don't know, just
a lot of the things you mentioned there do have like connecting thing. Like there's the milk. It's like, oh,
Mhm.
the inn lady like can lactate, and then the cow has like some milk coming off, and there's milk like falling out of the ceiling from a mysterious room you later learn
All the
about.
milk that they provide is from her.
Yeah.
So she's like a cow. Yeah.
It's like there's like threads being connected, but then once you get, and I kind of noticed this in the film too, once you do get to the part where you meet the female Ozaki, you kind of, the Odyssey part of the film kind of ends, and it's just about, the main character and her together,
Well,
and getting back home.
I feel like even before then, I feel like once he finds out that there are people who know about his brother figure and they're like, oh, he wanted this type of rice, and then you have to go that, it kind of shifts from being full on Odyssey to a mixture of Odyssey and conspiracy. Because then when she's introduced, it just becomes like a conspiracy film where it's like, is this a setup? Is this
Yeah, that's
real?
true.
Like,
You have some characters who are like, oh, I met you before, and apparently you'd already met my Aniki at that point.
and again, the cue cards on the wall that woman's reading, and I know there's behind the scenes reasons for
It was a
that,
fun
but
trivia point,
but
yeah.
the way it plays in the movie, it just stacks up the deck of
Yeah, I
we're
loved-
moving beyond the Homer's Odyssey that this main character's on to him in a conspiracy rabbit hole of like, is this
Yeah.
all being done against me on purpose?
I love the touch of him like reading off the end of that line together with her, and just like the confusion in his voice as the camera like pans over the Ramaji.
Do you want to explain the behind the scenes reasons for the cue cards on the wall?
So the woman reading those lines is an American lady. It's introduced earlier, like a scene earlier that like, oh yeah, the bottle shop's wife is American.
You can tell by the flags outside.
You can tell by the flags outside. She's more Japanese than us. She sells sake and stuff like that. But then, when you meet her, she's like reading her lines very stiffly and looking off in the corner of the room. And eventually you get the reveal of like, oh, she's reading her lines in Ramaji. And then the behind the scenes trivia was that like they didn't want to do it that way. They wanted her to just, speak Japanese normally, but she was just hopeless with the language. So they had to do the cue card thing, and they made a fourth wall joke out of it. And Takashi Miike realized like, oh, we can actually kind of use this to add to the, surrealness.
Again, until I read the behind the scenes, I didn't think of it as like a fourth wall joke. I just took it as the same as all of the other stuff going on in the movie.
I guess that's a good point. Yeah, I wonder why I didn't see it that way.
I still do, honestly. Like, I know that there's great behind the scenes stuff, but I'm doing a death of the author. I don't care about that shit. I still look at it within the framework of the movie as just our main character looking at things as some grander conspiracy against him.
Yeah, like I said, I love this film even before I looked up, what it was about.
Yes.
And even then, it's like, okay, I'll rewatch it with that frame, that frame of mind. But yeah, which by the way, it's only a few sentences I read. I didn't look into it too deeply, but basically the meaning behind it is that it is one part the main character's sexual awakening, and another part him coming to terms with his homosexuality and love for his Aniki.
Yes. Oh, I picked up on that.
Definitely once I read that, like the whole thing with the woman, it's like, oh, that's actually kind of clear now.
And why he put his head towards her genitalia to hear a male voice to reassure him.
Yeah, saying the chant that he made earlier.
I mean, it's quite obvious at the beginning when Anakire wants to see his circumcised penis.
Yeah.
And then he's like, oh, it's so large, so beautiful, so beautiful. And people keep saying it's beautiful and amazing, and that he has such a great penis.
And when he has sex with her at the end, the guy comes out.
Grabs him. I thought that was really well staged as well. All of that, but specifically him trying to thrust her off, and then she's just being dragged along. I thought that was just really, really beautifully executed.
Yeah.
Again, it's a cheap movie. It doesn't look fancy. You can figure out how they did a bunch of this stuff, but that's immaterial because the effect it gets across is gotten. I understood how they did that stuff, but I still I recoiled in my seat when that was happening.
Yeah, it was really cool.
And the weird little sci-fi zoom sound effect.
Yes, it did have weird sound effects.
Which reminded me of Dinner for Adele.
Yes.
A Czechoslovakian movie in which every time they threw stuff out of a window, a sci-fi laser noise would happen, and it made me think of that. But again,
Ulrich Lipsky would like this.
This wasn't that. I didn't find that like funny, haha, funny. I found it funny strange, and overall, the more I'm talking about, it, the more I'm enjoying the film. But that's a great part of something like this. It wants you to think and feel about it overall. What else do you want to discuss with Gozu? Was there anything more about the video game stuff that you wanted to reference, or you wanted to get across? I thought at the beginning of this you said, that'll come up later.
Basically in the No More Heroes franchise, his friend that runs the video store, the name of the video store is called Beefhead Videos. And, Guy is a big Miike fan, so it's like, Beefhead, Gozu, okay. I get it now.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
What did you think about the overall visual presentation of this? Because it's a lower budget film, but it shows, but I don't know, I thought it still had a very there's something about the camera quality and the lighting of it that feels Silent Hill to me, like
Hmm.
video game, like and you know how people love PS1 aesthetics?
Yes.
That's how I feel about a film from this era, filmed on this type of camera, whatever, where it's like, oh, I kind of like this aesthetic overall. It feels more like not haunted per se, but again, just something about it's not quite right. Well, if this
Hmm.
was filmed on like a higher budget with a sharper focused camera, I don't know if it would have that same character to it. How did you feel about the look of the film?
Yeah, there were a lot of really quiet shots of the film. Like again, when I mentioned earlier that I was looking for, skimming through it before I watched it for moments where someone would speak, it was one of those cases where I was struggling because there were just all these moments of silence. Like I remember one of the shot that I kept using to test the synchronization of the subtitles was it was during the car trip. I think it's like just before the 8 minute mark or just before the 7 minute mark where Minami, the main character, is going to take a piss, and then Ozaki walks up to him and just says his name. And you linger on that shot for so long, for so much of that conversation, and for a lot of scenes in this film. You have whole scenes where it's like a theatrical production of like, oh, the guy with the skin condition left the frame, and there hasn't been a cut in like 4 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you're like being a voyeur in this, and then suddenly the camera changes, and it kind of just takes you out of that comfortable third person view to another third person view. And yeah, it's really interesting. I obviously PS1 aesthetic. I'm thinking more along because I've played a lot of them Suda 51 games where a lot of bizarre things happen. I remember last year or the year before we were watching that film in your living room, the Matthew McConaughey Serenity, was it?
Serenity, where he's all about fishing.
Yeah, and I was pointing out things like, oh, this is kind of reminding me of like, kind of Suda 51-y kind of things. And, that film's not a very good film, to say
How
the
dare
least.
you?
I loved the film.
How dare
And I loved
you?
Gozu, so, that says everything you need to know about me. But there are a
Thank
lot
you.
of little elements in that film where it's like, oh, if Takashi Miike could remake that film and use some of his Gozu experience, like, the effect will come off more effectively.
Final thing I want to wrap myself out with this episode. Other than I do recommend Gozu as I did at the start. It's not for everyone, obviously, but that's fine. It doesn't need to be. Takashi Miike, I don't know much about him as a man. I just know about his output. He puts out a lot of stuff,
Such a big
and
filmography.
I don't know why, because he's clearly very talented. You see something like this, you see Audition, you see 13 Assassins, the Ace Attorney movie I'm sure is good, but he's clearly talented, but he does so much that it kind of can't be sustained. He's a filmmaker that has probably made a lot more shit than he has good stuff,
Mm.
and I'm so curious as to why. I looked him up a bit, not too much, but I was a bit surprised. He hasn't made a film since 2001, which is only a few years back now, but 2001, he's directed TV. He's moved to TV now.
Yeah.
He was always putting out like 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 films a year, but now he's stopped doing that for the last few years and is just focusing on a few episodes of TV shows here and there. And I, again, I don't know too much about the man, but I'm trying to understand, is it just he's a working director? Like, I just work at it and I somehow managed to get a few just banger films out there. Or is he like got money that he needs to pay off? I don't know. Does he just love films so much he just can't help but keep making them? I have no clue. I have
Mm.
no clue about him because if you have, say, an American director equivalent of this guy, I don't know if we'll be talking about them as favorably. like, oh yeah, they put out a lot of movies and some of them are good, but like most of them are shit. But I feel like, oh, well, when is a Japanese director who's made a few cult classic films? I feel like, and they've referenced in again, there's references to them in other media. It feels like, oh man, Takashi Miike, ooh, there's a there's an allure to him. But
Yeah.
if you just translated what he's done in his career to the West, we wouldn't be doing this. We wouldn't be having this conversation the same way. I don't know,
There
maybe.
is such an allure to him, and so many of his films are infamous. Like his Wikipedia page is like a controversies section about some of his films. Obviously, the works of Suda 51 like sing his praises all the time. People, reference certain elements like how violent some of his films can get, and it was really interesting. Like I mentioned before, I watched an interview with him,
Mm-hmm.
and like all of that mystique was just kind of brushed away because he just talked like a regular guy.
Mm.
He had to think hard about the questions he was asked, and he gave, a kind of a slow answer where he was still kind of thinking about the answers to the questions as he was speaking. And it's like, yeah, well, what is Takashi Miike?
The writer of the film is also a character.
Yeah, he talked about him a little bit in that interview.
He's also an actor. He
Yeah.
was in He was in Kill Bill.
Oh, okay.
He plays Charlie Brown, if that helps you any. He's
Kill Bill's one of the only ones I haven't seen from Tarantino.
Oh, that's so sad.
I know.
He's the head of Lucy Liu's crime lord gang, the Crazy 88s. He's like the head of the Crazy 88s, and he wears, the best way to describe it is he wears Green Hornet. What's the Green Hornet's Bruce Lee?
Kato?
He wears the Kato mask.
Okay.
And they nickname him Charlie Brown because he looks like Charlie Brown because he's bald and has a silly face. And it's that guy. He's a writer of this.
Yeah, actually,
and he also wrote Ichi the Killer. And so you see that he writes fucked up shit he plays fucked up shit.
Yeah, in that interview, I actually forgot about this until you brought up the writer. There's something Sato. I think when one of the questions asked was like, oh, where did this film come from? And Miike mostly talked about how it seemed like this Sato guy was kind of the main head about this. He was saying that apparently Sato, in his, recent acting career around that time, he was playing more minor roles, and he was getting, I think he phrased it as like disgruntled about the fact that his roles were meant to elevate the newer, younger lead actors of these films. And so he wanted to, make something of his own. And he'd previously worked with Miike on Ichi the Killer, and this was, I think Gozu was the thing that he made, to get out of that mindset of like, oh, I'm not enjoying my acting career at the moment.
A lot of these people work together or still work together. You'll see some of them, in some of the comedy films, some of the horror films of Takashi Miike. So this is kind of like a stable of talent that he's drawn from over the years. Like the boss appears a few times in some Takashi Miike work, and same with like
yeah, he was in something.
A few. Yeah, he was in Audition and things like that. But yeah, there's just a few that recur. And again, like the main guy, our main man, he still does stuff, and he's appeared in a few other, one or two other Takashi stuff, and it's nice to see that this stable of strangeness still generates work here and there. I just find Takashi Miike a truly just I don't know what his deal is. I want him to have been a guy that maybe didn't make as many films and just made, focused on making the good ones, but would that have made him more special? And I'm like, probably. Like, he could have been a Park Chan-wook, That's like the South Korean version I think of a lot. Like, that's the guy who did Old Boy and The Handmaiden and Decision to Leave. I'm like, Takashi Miike could be that type of filmmaker, but he's just like, I don't say no to any work. Like,
it's just so interesting that
his kids movies and he made this,
I think it's just really interesting that he has such a huge scope of different things that he's done.
Yes. the last episode on the pod, we talked about Inside Out.
Mm-hmm.
And Richard Kind was the voice of Bing Bong. And he had a quote recently in which he says, I say yes to 97% of the things offered to me, and no one seems to mind. And that's how I feel like Takashi Miike is. I say yes to 97% of things, and people seem to mind, because I think people seem to mind a lot. Like whenever I see Takashi Miike brought up in like film discussions, it is one of the first things of like, I wish that guy would just make good movies.
There was some sort of talk in the No More Heroes 3 thing about like, oh, his comedies or like his like writing. It's like the elements that he brings has to complement the other people that he works with.
Mm-hmm.
It's not all centered around him as we kind of build up.
Anything else about Gozu?
I think I already said it, but in case I didn't, I definitely recommend the film.
Bartek recommends it. Is it a family film? Watch this with your brother. You think he'll like it?
I don't think my brother would like this film very much.
No, your brother doesn't seem to like...
He didn't like Twin Peaks, so...
Well, of course not. Your brother's not one I think of as a cerebral type, let alone... I don't think of him loving a surrealist interpretation of blah, blah, blah. I don't see him sitting down and being like, yes, I really liked On the Silver Globe. I really liked Gozu.
Yeah, the surreal, I don't see him liking the surreal that much.
But that was your selection for the kickoff of Spooky Month, and now I have to keep the ball running.
That's my non-Hollywood pick for the month.
I had to grab the ball, and I'm going to run. I'm picking a director of note as well. Someone who we have not discussed a film of. If I am mistaken, you'll let me know. But they're a director that is very important to both of us. You have often talked about one of his films.
Mm-hmm.
You had to study it in school. And it's a musical film we are doing. Not the one that you studied in school, but we are doing an early 70s joint from Brian De Palma, who... we are going to discuss Phantom of the Paradise, which is a very cult, campy musical fare. As you can kind of tell by the title, maybe plays a bit around Phantom of the Opera type stuff. And you and I have never talked about a Brian De Palma film on this podcast. We have referenced some of his works, used particularly with The Untouchables, comes up a lot on the pod.
With the Irish actor.
Oh, everyone's favorite Irish
actor. Sean
Connery. And that's come up a bunch, but we've never done any of his movies. I could have chosen Carrie. That's obviously a great Brian De Palma horror one, but it's a year of musicals.
The Sun Will Come Out Tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
The Sun Will Come Out Tomorrow? That Carrie?
Sure. It's also the one with Travolta in it. But... we are talking about Phantom of the Paradise, so please, people, if you have not seen Phantom of the Paradise before, or you're meaning to give it a rewatch, then please find a copy of it and watch it for yourself, so you're ready for our discussion next time on Pictures Powwow, where we're getting creepy, and we're getting crawly, we're getting Octobery about things, and later on in the month, we'll be celebrating our 9 years of doing this podcast.
Yeah, somewhere around October 20, early 20s.
Early 20s. You can look it up.
I think that'll be around my pick, actually.
That'll be around yours, so you better make it a Paul Giamatti horror film. No, a Frankie Muniz horror film. Good luck.
Amanda Bynes horror film.
Her life? That's unfair.
Ryan, I was about to make that joke, I think.
How dare you? How dare you? How dare you? I did it, but how dare
Ryan,
you try as well?
To quote the Love Guru, you.
to quote Despicable Me, grew. So we are done with our discussion. Thank you all so much for listening and tuning in. You can find us on the social medias of Facebook and Twitter under Spit and Polish Presents. You can rate and review the podcast on whatever site allows you to do so. We try our best to keep track of it. Although we've been hosting podcasts for a number of years, I have yet to find a site fully that does a great job of being able to track all the reviews we get from multiple different sites and countries and things, because it's not as simple as like, oh well, we can just easily get all the Apple podcast reviews. No, we can easily see the Australian ones, but we have to specifically type into the URL.
US.
So there
instead
are
of AU.
a couple of sites that kind of like do that. Like, this one does like all of the Apple ones and like some of the other ones, but then not all of them. And there's never been, in 9 years of doing this, I've never found a site that just does like it all easily. Like, there's always like, oh, well, it doesn't have this one. Like, it doesn't have Podchaser, it doesn't have all, Pocket Casts or whatever. Like, it doesn't, always has been that way. And then I got a tragic email. One of the sites I use called Chartable, which does cover maybe 70% of the podcasting sites' reviews, shutting down.
Oh.
Shutting down because Spotify bought it up and it's like, we don't need this now. I'm like, all right.
Have we had any new iTunes reviews in the past couple of years? Because after Unappreciated Masterpieces, they kind of died down.
Everyone, be the solution to Bartek's question there.
Yes, I'm bringing that up just out of curiosity. I'm not pressuring anyone.
We get a lot more YouTube comments, which is always appreciated.
You know what?
Fine.
You know what we got? I think earlier today of this recording.
What?
Someone on Facebook shared a post of an old episode we did.
There you go.
The 44-inch chest one.
Share episodes about, do your part, and be the change in the world that you want to see, including making sure everyone knows about Spit and Polish, because we're always presenting to you our opinions on movies and occasionally TV shows.
For example, I recommend 44-inch chest.
Bartek recommends 44-inch chest, and I recommend The Love Guru. There you go.
You.